With the dates of July 4th, 1776 becoming known as Independence Day, and August 2nd, 1776, the signing date of the Declaration of Independence. But before all of that could happen, the 13 colonies had to create an army to succeed in their rebellion against the British monarchy. So, on June 14, 1775, the Continental Army was founded. 250 years later, the United States of America is here to celebrate that historic moment. Hello, I am Terry Wilson, the Director of Development and Marketing at WQPT, and I want to thank you for tuning in as we take the time to highlight the United States Army in this anthology. Over the 40-plus years that WQPT has been on the air, it has been very important to us to share the history of our military as well as the personal stories of veterans and those currently serving. We had only to explore our own archives to rediscover this meaningful content, including interviews conducted during our Embracing Our Military initiative. As such, some portions may include history and stories from other branches of the military. WQPT would like to thank everyone who has allowed us to share their stories. We appreciate your service and your sacrifice, and we are honored to help your voices be heard. We do recognize that some veterans who have shared their stories with WQPT are no longer with us, and we have chosen to include their segments to keep their history alive.
Any anniversary or birthday is a big deal because it gives you the time to look back. And so 250 is a milestone. And when you start looking back at all the way back to the Continental Army and George Washington and how it's morphed through time and how it's met the nation's needs has been really, really special. And the Army has a song, that we sing all the time, but one of the great lines about it, it says, and the Army goes rolling along. And I think that is something for me. You think how long it's been rolling along in support of the United States, I think is just amazing. And 250 just gives us an opportunity to look back, to see how long it's been and what they've done, the great things soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine have done for the country, and then a chance to look forward to what's next.
I'm a retired Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, and my service spanned a number of years. I came in the Army right after the Vietnam War, just as it was ending. And then I was in that period of time, sort of a transitional time between Vietnam and Desert Storm. I think when I was a kid, I played, Army like a lot of kids, or worked on a lot of military models. And so I think looking back, it was meant to be. It was a good fit for me, and I'm very thankful, again, that I was able to have that opportunity to serve our country and to serve others.
Alan Ross, retired United States Army. I was a military policeman. I worked in security, especially in Germany. I worked on the roads, and we took care of traffic control. We also assisted combat units in training. My father is a Holocaust survivor, so it was especially poignant for me to be in Germany and to read up on the history and talk to the old soldiers. Well, I think for most of us, if we've served our time, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, or 20 years, we're in the military and we do a good job and we leave. We don't necessarily become heroes. We don't win the Medal of Honor, but we're proud of what we do, and we try to instill a sense of patriotism and love of country in those around us.
16.1 million Americans served in the U.S. military during World War II. As of the census in 2000, 5.7 million World War II American veterans were still alive. Here now are some of the stories of the war from local veterans.
Oh, we were sitting at a tavern down in Albany, having a glass of beer, decided that's what we wanted to do. So we just walked across the street to a gentleman by the name of Olds. Earl Olds was his name, and he was the one that took all the information, and of course he sent it to the Whiteside County board at that time, Selective Service Board, and within a matter of a few days we got that dear letter in the mail, your friends and neighbors have selected you.
You were scared every minute of the day. You never, even though I was in an anti-tank platoon and headquarters company, so seriously, I was, as somebody said in one of our other platoons, said they were up close enough to get in on some of the excitement, but back far enough to be pretty safe. But that didn't, that was no matter. You were scared every minute of the day. That you could always hear the artillery in the background, and you know somebody was getting it somewhere.
My brother and I decided to go into the Navy on July 4th of 1940 because our dad was a bank officer in Wall Street and said we were going into World War II or III or whatever it was, and we might as well go in and get trained to be officers. And we went in. The Navy didn't have any PT boats. We went in where they had PT number 1 through 9. So we were in on the very beginning of the PT program, and by the end of the war they had 750 all around the world.
It always seemed like you weren't ever going to go home, because it was always there, or there's always guards there, and they always had guns on you, and you were, you know, we saw a few shot and things like that would bother you. And you'd see that you can't fool around with them because they didn't allow it.
We were protecting those ships, cargo ships going over. There's usually 4 deep and maybe from here to that house over apart. And 65 of them for only 5 of us. And I was the only Coast Guard, on the only Coast Guard ship in that crew. The rest of them was big Navy destroyer up ahead, and in the bows was usually us, one side or the other, and 2 on the back.
Gerald Galusha of Clinton has kept these items that belonged to captured German soldiers for a long time. He was among the troops sent to replace those killed and wounded in one of the bloodiest battles in World War II, the Battle of the Bulge.
We went over on a ship from England to France in the middle of the night. We landed the boat. We had guns, but we had no ammunition. Now, and the Germans actually infiltrated us. They were shooting during the night, but I don't know if anybody got hit or not. That I don't know. They issued this ammunition when we got to the staging area. Then there was a couple that, they got shot in the foot, and the other one got shot in the hand on purpose. Of course, they were supposed to have ended up in jail and prison. I don't know, but they shot themselves. Well, I never got that desperate, that's for sure.
Nelson Larrabee was also sent to replenish troop strength.
we were cleanup. We were cleanup, and didn't come too close to a lot of fighting, defensive or aggressive. The only thing I really remember in fighting was one day we took off up a hill, a slope hill, you know, and there was a bunker up at the top of it, and the Germans were firing at us. And I had a great big Indian, it weighed over 200 pounds. And he just jumped out of my half-track and took the 50 caliber machine gun with these yards of ammunition following behind it. And he just took along and he wiped out the whole bunker.
A soldier who had been wounded several times told Galusha he would know when he was going to be wounded.
You were scared all the time anyway over there, but you were more scared. You just knew, you had that feeling something was going to happen, but you didn't know how bad, like I said, whether you're going to get killed or wounded. It was just a bad feeling that you had. I was on the side of this mountain, and the Germans were shelling us with mortars. And the mortar shell let I don't know how close, but it was very close. And the shrapnel went clear through my steel helmet interlater into my head. And then the other piece came down through, cut my eyelid and down through my nose and left a big hole there in my nose, which healed up later by itself.
One of the German prisoners he was guarding helped to stop the bleeding.
They could have killed us, killed me, no question. But I think this was when they were defeated at Bastogne. They knew that the war they were done, because that was the second stab they made at it, and they got defeated both times at Bastogne. So that was it. So they just wanted to be alive too, as far as that goes. They were human, the same as everybody else.
William Shore was only 17 when he received his orders from the Army, which sent him to the University of Kansas to begin studying basic engineering.
The agreement was that when, in the quarter in which you reached your 18th birthday, they would send you to troops. Well, fortunately for my college career, I didn't reach the age of 18 until November the 9th, and that was the day after the second quarter started, so I got 2 quarters in at the University of Kansas.
He was inducted in February of 1944.
We sat around Cap Dodge waiting for them to decide what they were going to do with us, because we had been in Army Specialized Training, which is that yellow patch there, and they wanted to decided they needed infantrymen more than needed engineers, and they finally decided to send us to Camp Blanding, Florida, where I was took basic training in radio as a radio man. But when basic training was over, at 17 weeks, they assigned me to the 65th Division, Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and went into the headquarters company office in 261st Infantry, 1st Battalion. And the first sergeant says, well, he says they got some empty bunks down there in anti-tank. And so that was as close as I came to doing any comment. And so I trained in anti-tank until we went overseas. We were on line at the Siegfried line for, maybe a month, and then they had broken through the line, and we took off sent to the Rhineland, and crossed the Rhine at Mainz, and went up through central Germany, and then they decided that we weren't going to go to Berlin, I guess, and we headed south, went through one skirmish after another until we got to a town in Austria called Enns, which is, the bigger town close by was one called Linz, and they're right at the corner of the junction of the Enns River and the Danube. And we were there for several months.
Hugo Ehlers was popular among his fellow troops in the South Pacific. He was a mail clerk.
It would come, and it would be many weeks, probably delayed,
But when it would get to me, why I would get it sorted out and for the company and get it up to the, and then we have a mail call every day and make everybody happy.
He liked his job too.
It kept me from getting shot.
When LST 325 docked in Peoria in the summer of 2007, people waited in line to tour it. The tank landing ship was the brainchild of Winston Churchill, who saw a need for a ship that could deliver tanks and troops directly to the beachhead. Roald Zavanek and Don Chapman were in the Navy, George White in the Marines. All three were on board LSTs. They also worked on restoring LST 325, which had been loaned to the Greek Navy. Chapman spent months in Greece making it seaworthy and was part of the crew that brought it back to the U.S. He was in the Philippines in the war.
We were mostly hauling material and troops. We hauled a lot of Australian troops, and we'd get them like in New Guinea or down in there, Hollandia, and bring them up to where the invasions had been, and maybe we'd be there a day or 2 days after the initial landing. And as far as action goes, we were in some problems. In fact, my ship shot down a Jap Betty, and otherwise it was pretty routine.
George White, however, had a close call.
So I went from Saipan to Okinawa for the invasion there. And the invasion, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but we were faking a landing so we would attract all of their fire. And that's what happened. We attracted their kamikaze planes, and one of them got my ship. And so we all jumped, of course.
The plane had two 500-pound bombs.
But they didn't go off because they had to be detonated by hand. And our Coast Guard crew had shot this pilot dead before he could trigger the mechanism. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Zavanek was in the Philippines, Guam, and Japan.
So we hauled troops around, just like Don did too. We hauled troops and supplies around here and there and everywhere. And, we made the one landing there. We was expecting opposition at Palawan Island at Port-au-Prince, in fact. The Japanese had a prisoner of war camp, their American prisoner of war camp, and we would have walked in the water to get those guys back. And after the preliminary work of two battle cruisers come by on the island and blasted the crap out of it, and then the dive bombers come by and they dive bombed and they strafed, and then the small rocket ships went in there and rocketed the beaches, and then we unloaded our troops in their small boats, and they went in, and then when it was pretty secure, after a couple of hours, we pulled our ship into the harbor area there. And Tokyo Rose, who was a propaganda lady there, she always played the latest American tunes. She always knew where everybody was at all the time. And she was telling us that the Japanese fleet had us hemmed in the harbor there, and they were shooting us like ducks in a shooting gallery. Well, we knew it was wrong anyway, you know.
He brought home a number of souvenirs, but nothing like what other military personnel took.
Japanese in those days had a lot of gold teeth. And the troops we had aboard there, I've seen necklaces of some of them had teeth all the way down to the belt line and stuff, because after they shot the guy, he knew he had no use for his teeth, so they took a rifle butt and flipped the teeth out with their fingers and made a necklace out of them.
Jack Searles and his brother Bob spent their summers racing sailboats off the New Jersey coast. That experience paid off when they joined the Navy and were assigned two, as they were hoping for, PT boats.
We went into Guadalcanal, and after Guadalcanal, He took a squadron to the English Channel on the invasion of Normandy, and I took a squadron up to Okinawa. In other words, we were never off the PTs. But as far as I was concerned, they gave me orders 2 years before the end of the war that I was going to be the first PT to invade the Japanese inland sea. And I had an ordinary squadron with 12 boats. I had 15, 550 officers, and 550 men.
He witnessed more than his share of fighting.
About every other night in Guadalcanal against the Japanese fleet. I don't know what action you want. Had destroyers, battleships, firing at us for about 2 or 3 hours, and we were firing at them every other night for 3 or 4 months. If you had been through what I'd been through and hadn't lost an officer man, I think you'd look upon it fondly. Damn fondly. Especially when you saw all these other boats being blown up right next to you. And those officers and men weren't coming back. So I lost a lot of friends that way, but didn't lose any from my squadron.
There were lighter moments after Robert Montgomery was under Searle's command.
I showed him how to play bridge, how to shoot pool, and by the time my brother and I took all the money we could from him, he stopped playing those 2 games.
The retired naval commander recalled his 2 tours of duty in the Pacific in his book named after the small island in the Solomon Islands, which had been occupied by the Japanese. After its capture by U.S. forces, the island hosted a fleet of PT boats for a year, including Jack Kennedy's PT-109. The war hit close to home for Richard Duberg. He wanted to join the Navy, but was assigned to the Coast Guard when they found out he was a musician. An ear for music helps interpret sonar signals.
They had to have people could recognize from a tone note that was sent out from our ship to discover a submarine, and if it reflected back, is it above or below that, or that tone that went out from our sonar equipment.
Duberg was on board the USS Moberly.
And I was the only Coast Guard, on the only Coast Guard ship in that crew. The rest of them was big Navy destroyer up ahead, and the bows was usually us, one side or the other, and 2 on the back. And I swear that we performed so well and our shakedown crew at Bermuda that the German intelligence got word of that, because we were practicing on a captured Italian submarine.
The Moberly was returning to the United States bound for Boston when it received word that a freighter had been torpedoed by a German submarine off the Rhode Island coast.
And then they moved down from the coast there to not Boston, but before you get to Boston there, and they got picked up by sonar, and sonar dropped Navy. They dropped hedgehogs and depth charges, but they didn't get the submarine because the submarine was out in deeper water. And when we came up Long Island Sound, and we were ordered to stay back there and see if we couldn't locate the submarine.
The crew of the German sub sent items out of the torpedo tubes to make it appear the sub had sunk.
Life raft and part of a chart, table chart, a wooden one, and the captain's hat.
Duberg says the captain of the Moberly finally decided to sink the sub if it was the last thing they did.
And he called to the sonar officer and said, proceed with a hedgehog attack and a depth charge attack. And And our sonar officer turned around and looked at me and he said, Duberg, he said, did you hear that? And I said, yeah, well, call and have him repeat that and see what he's trying to talk about. And when he got the captain, who was down below, the captain says, proceed as I demand.
Duberg says that was the end of the submarine, but they felt the impact too.
Our ship went dead right over the top of that submarine, or a little past it. It actually cut down the engines and the power, and it threw people all over on the ship, and some of them even had some bad problems with their body after that, because it threw them against the bulkheads, and it's funny it didn't sink our ship.
It was the last U-boat sunk in World War II. Just 2 more combat missions to go, and Doy O'Keefe, a radio operator on a B-24, could go home. But the 29th mission on September 27th of 1944 put all plans of going home on hold when his plane came under heavy attack.
Had the living crap shot out of us. You had people shoot at, airplanes, and the bombers we were flying, and the fighter planes would come in, and you've seen those in the movies, and they'd shoot, and that just shoot you down, or shoot you out, so you couldn't fly anymore.
He parachuted to safety and managed to avoid being captured for a few hours, even hopping a freight train he thought might be headed to France. But he was caught and sent to Stalag Luft 4, a POW camp in Poland.
Yeah, they had a place where you could take a shower, and that's all it was. I mean, you group them in, and everybody was in these rooms, and you took a shower in there.
On February 7th of 1945, the camp was evacuated in the face of Russian advance. The POWs and their German guards began marching out of Poland. It was the worst winter in Europe in years, with over a foot of snow. Food and shelter were scarce. O'Keefe says as time wore on, some of the German soldiers walked off, presumably for home.
Then we started marching ourselves back towards our own companies, infantry people, and when they got into that way, we knew we were close enough that we probably would get out of there, and that's what ended up happening. We got away, and by that they were halfway escaped too, or halfway gone.
On the morning of April 26th, the German soldiers who remained surrendered to the American POWs. Later that day, the group encountered a scouting jeep with 2 American infantrymen. Doy O'Keefe had been a prisoner of war for 221 days. The war was fought back home in the United States as well. Tom Douglas II has a wealth of memorabilia from his days as a pilot for the Navy, ferrying planes from manufacturing plants to wherever the military needed them. He had been a senior at the University of Iowa and wanted to be a Navy pilot, but he was rejected for being underweight. So he ate as much as he could, put on the needed weight, and was accepted.
It's a matter of doing something in the Navy.
His favorite plane was the Culver Cadet.
It's a kind of a hot rod, but this plane was made to shoot at and knock down.
The planes were used to train anti-aircraft gunners, operated by remote control during such missions. Civilians did their part too. On the Rock Island Arsenal, the shops were manufacturing weapons 24 hours a day.
They were so pressed that they asked the employees to give up their lunch hours. And employees, many of them, lots of stories of employees sitting there at their lathe eating a sandwich while the machine is turning so that they don't, so nothing shuts down and nothing goes away, because they're very aware, even before Pearl Harbor, they're aware that they're giving weapons to the Great Britain, but even after Pearl Harbor, even more so, that this is, we've got this right now.
The employees considered themselves soldiers of industry. The arsenal was awarded 2 E-pennants, or awards, for excellence.
Our thinking was different. It was a duty that we had. Now I don't know if they figure that's a duty or just something that the government brings on. I don't know. But it was a duty. We were protecting our country, and we did it because we wanted to, up to a point, not because we really had to. If you wanted to dodge the draft, I suppose we probably could have somewhere along the line, but we didn't feel that way.
I grew up from a smart-ass 17-year-old to a mature 20-year-old by the time I got home.
The attack that the Japanese pulled on us was so deliberate and so surprising that we were just alarmed. We couldn't understand as a people what they were doing. And almost to a person, everybody was behind the war effort. And they didn't delight in the rationing, the food rationing, the gasoline rationing, the tire rationing and all that. But we took it as a matter of life.
I was always, as I say, in a little safer position, and so I didn't have a lot of bad reminders to think about. So I've never minded talking about it. My perspective was that we were doing something we had to do. Hitler was one very evil person, and we needed to be stopped, and we did it.
My name is Andrew Gates. I served in the United States Marine Corps, separated as a sergeant. I served in an engineer battalion out of Okinawa, Japan. We deployed to the Pacific region for training, which is a pre-deployment training, for eventually going to Iraq. I spent 7 months in Iraq with a shovel and a cement truck, just repairing supply routes between places like Fallujah, Ramadi, Al-Assad, Al-Taqaddum. Since 2012, I've been the coordinator of Veterans Recruitment and Services for St. Ambrose University in Davenport. I've been able to move forward from my service and assist other veterans with their education.
My name is Barney Young, and I was a pilot for the United States Army Air Corps. Of course, the war had been over since August, and I finished my last trip. They said, hey, Young, we got an airplane going back to the States. You want to take it back? Well, absolutely, So we took off from Karachi, India, and follow the Suez Canal to Cairo, Egypt. Then we wanted to go across the North Atlantic, so I had to go down to French West Africa, Dakar. We wanted to come up to the east coast of South America. We landed at Fort Lauderdale. And they said, sir, it says, we got an airplane all ready to go back to Chicago. I said, the heck with you, and give me a train ticket.
I am Jackie Inman, the Rock Island Center Director for the USO of Illinois. We have our USO program, which is called Camp R&R, and we have a lodge up in Wisconsin. And through the summer months, we offer a time for families to reconnect, especially after a deployment. They enjoy a week up there. Everything's paid for. They can enjoy boating and fishing and horseback riding. We had 2 couples, actually, that I know personally that were having difficulties, one with a child, dealing with anger from the parent being gone, and they were able to take advantage of Camp R&R, and they are doing extremely well. And so that's a huge, huge milestone for them.
John Thotis, parent of Corporal Chris Thotis, United States Marine Corps. Chris was an 0311. For those who don't speak military jargon, that means he's a rifleman grunt for the Marine Corps. He was infantry. One night, my wife says, by the way, Chris wants to talk to you. Oh, yeah, about what? And suddenly he broke it to me that, by the way, I joined the Marine Corps infantry, and I've got to go. As a parent, very proud, and at the same token, very scared. He had 2 deployments in active battle zones. The last one was the worst in Afghanistan, and so that, from a parent's perspective, is difficult. But you're proud, but nervous.
I am Marvin Strum, PFC, Army. In Korea, we pulled guard duty in the wintertime, and it was 30 degrees below zero. My brother was in the World War II. They were more welcome back in the Korean War. Just like the Korean War. They didn't care. It was a forgotten war. The honor fight is a fabulous thing. They take you to all the monuments. And the most important, the greatest thing is, and I mean it's really a tremendous experience, is when you come back and land, and all the people are there shouting, welcome back and all the other stuff. I never thought that could happen,
My name is Mitch Chapman. I served in Afghanistan in 2008 as a specialist in the Illinois Army National Guard as an infantryman. After I got off active duty, I decided to get my bachelor's degree in operations management, and I graduated 5 years to the day. I got injured, so that meant a lot. Currently, I am a contract specialist at the Rock Island Arsenal Army Contracting Command, writing contracts with the government. And I think the service has really helped me prepare for real life, helped me take charge of situations when they're stressful, stand up and take charge in case something's going wrong. You're going to execute and get the mission completely done. And it's also given me the ability to give back to the community by being a battle buddy director through Jason's Box and helping other vets get squared away that need resources and need to talk, just need to hang out with the vets and just need to talk to somebody one-on-one.
I am Joshua Ryan Brown, Sergeant in the United States Army Reserve. I was actually on active duty from 2005 to 2010, and then I rejoined the reserves while I've been going to Augustana. My father was a 30-year Marine. A lot of the things he instilled in me growing up really paid dividends in the military. And then now I got off active duty, then I went to college to hopefully become a dentist, and I saw that the reserves really supplemented that, offering me a dental assistant job through the reserves.
As a child growing up, going to the Rock Island Arsenal as frequently as I did, I just remember a lot of family activities. There weren't a lot of soldiers there, so it was atypical from other bases that I have seen and heard of. But being on the Arsenal, you had the opportunity to experience so many of the amazing things that the Arsenal has to offer. My grandfather was a World War II veteran and was part of the liberation of the Philippine Islands. I have several of his Purple Hearts. It was always a big part of my life and a big part of my heart. I learned through Alan and through other experiences that you don't have to be a soldier to serve your country. By putting the military program in action, that was something that I knew I could do to help in a real way.
My name is Stephen D. Blake. I'm originally from down in Tennessee. I was stationed in the 101st Airborne Division for 23 of my 31 years. I'm proud of the people that I've served with. I feel blessed that I was honored with getting to serve with them. That's the main thing about being a leader in the military. You have to humble yourself and realize that you're serving with them. They all raised their hand, stepped up, and said, pick me, send me, I will go. they're facing that danger, and they're carrying that legacy forward. And I'm going to tell you, that's probably the most important part of serving in the military.
Yeah, so, we're celebrating 250 years of the U.S. Army. We're celebrating 250 years of this nation. And I think the two are so intimately tied. As you talk about us breaking away from Great Britain, the American Revolution, none of that could have happened without the U.S. Army. And so it really is inherently tied to the history of us, the history of this country, and brings it all the way up to today. It's not just celebrating 250 years ago, it's celebrating 250 years of the U.S. Army and its role for our nation in shaping what we are, shaping our values, shaping everything about what our nation is.
More than 140 years ago, an obscure Midwestern poet read an original work to President Grant and thousands of spectators on Memorial Day. Then his contribution all but vanished. J.P. Irvine, a former newspaperman, lived with his wife Harriet in Washington, where he worked at the Bureau of Pensions. He had lost a daughter in a carriage accident, and his brother David, who was killed in the Civil War Battle of Nashville, December 1864. But on May 30th, 1873, the Kirkwood, Illinois native addressed as many as 20,000 people crowding the grounds at Arlington Cemetery. The idea of a day to honor our war dead, known as Decorations Day, was only 5 years old. John Logan, the commander of an influential veterans group called the Grand Army of the Republic and Kindred Spirits, suggested members decorate the graves of their fallen comrades with flowers every May. The idea quickly turned into a national celebration of those who had served. How the Arlington event organizers chose someone as unknown as Irvine remains unclear, but on this day, President Ulysses S. Grant and his wife Julia headlined the ceremonies. Other notable attendees included Frederick Douglass and the secretaries of the Departments of State, War, and Treasury. Vendors on the ground sold lemonade and ice water as the masses listened to the speeches and songs. The crowd gathered at the 2-year-old tomb of the unknown soldier, draped with garlands of evergreen just for the event. In the heat and humidity of a sunny day, Irvine delivered 112 lines.
And the valiant are here, and the weak and the strong, the known and unknown, and the army is famed.
The address gave Irvine some fame and helped his work into the pages of national magazines. The family returned to rural Illinois in 1875, and Irvine's poetic record diminishes to near silence. Unknown stands as one of Irvine's most ambitious efforts, and certainly his most noteworthy. Yet he didn't include the piece in his only book, The Green Leaf and the Gray, published in 1891. He died a year later, but with Unknown rediscovered, the poet and a piece of local and national history lives on.
The Battle of Credit Island was part of the fight for control of the upper Mississippi during the War of 1812, a conflict between the United States and the United Kingdom which ended in 1815. On September 4th and 5th, 1814, American forces led by Major Zachary Taylor, who would go on to become President of the United States, fought British soldiers under the direction of Lieutenant Duncan Graham and as many as 1,200 Native Americans, including Chief Black Hawk. It began on the afternoon of September 4th, when strong winds forced the American troops to encamp at Willow Island, now known as Pelican Island, with their 8 gunboats and 334 troops. It was an uneventful night, but as the sun came up on September 5th, a number of Native Americans had crossed the shallow water to Willow Island from nearby Credit Island, where an American sentry was shot and killed. Though the American troops had fought and cleared the Native Americans from the island, the British troops moved their artillery to a higher elevation in order to attack. With the first shot of British cannon fire, Credit Island became the site of one of the westernmost and last battles of the War of 1812. The British barrage continued for nearly an hour before Taylor ordered a retreat downriver, his boats badly riddled with cannon fire and with 11 men badly wounded, 3 mortally. In his written report, Major Taylor said, "I was compelled to drop down about 3 miles before a proper place presented itself for landing, as but few of the boats had anchors sufficient to stop them in the river. Here I halted for the purpose of having the wounded attended and some of the boats repaired, as some of them had been injured by the enemy's artillery." This was the third and final American expedition up the Mississippi River that year, each ending in defeat. 3 months later, on December 24th, the Peace of Ghent ended the war. At the end of the war, a trading post was established on the island, offering credit to the local tribes to be repaid during hunting and harvest seasons.
After the War of 1812 ended, the United States determined to cement its hold on the upper Mississippi River by creating a series of forts. Rock Island had been identified as a desirable place for a fort by Zebulon Pike in 1805 due to its location on the Rock Island Rapids and its proximity to the Sac and Meskwaki tribes. Black Hawk's support of the British in the War of 1812 made that recommendation appear even more powerful. Brigadier General Thomas Smith arrived at Rock Island in early May 1816 and chose the western tip of the island as the spot for construction of a fort. From this spot, U.S. troops could control the river, protect American fur traders and settlers, and keep open a line of communication and commerce to other posts further upriver. Fort Armstrong was the beginning of the Quad Cities area, provided security for settlers on both sides of the river, and later was the administrative center for the Black Hawk War of 1832. The fort was abandoned after 1836 as the frontier moved further west.
Tell me the role of the JMTC.
So the Joint Manufacturing and Technology Center is basically one of the arsenals in the organic industrial base. The Army has 23 different depots, arsenals, and ammo plants. We're one of 3 arsenals. So there's Pine Bluff Arsenal, there's Waterville Arsenal, and then there's the Joint Manufacturing and Technology Center. And we're a vertically integrated metal manufacturing facility with the Army Center of Excellence for Advanced Manufacturing as well.
It is a vital part of Arsenal Island. As a matter of fact, when you think of Arsenal Island, you do really think of the Joint Manufacturing and Technology Center.
Absolutely, and that was kind of the genesis of the whole island. You know, there's other commands that are here now, and they're all extremely important commands that have a real impact on the nation, but the heart of the island has always been the manufacturing capabilities.
And back when they had the BRAC eliminations, there was almost the fear of JMTC leaving Arsenal Island at one point. It has really prospered in the last few years.
Yeah, it's been great. I think we've recognized as a military the capabilities, and we've pushed a little bit harder on those capabilities. The Advanced Manufacturing Center of Excellence has gotten a lot of attention, so we're on the cutting edge of a lot of technology, which has definitely helped, but that's still a relatively small part of a really large metal manufacturing capability we have. Everything from, you know, building the gun turrets for the M1A1 that you could see here at Rock Island's museum that we brought in, all the way up to armor, and everything down to as small as a firing pin or a spring. We can do it all across that.
On 1 October 1903, Chief of Ordnance General William Crozier sent notice that 15 boxes of ordnance material were being shipped to Rock Island Arsenal for the purpose of creating a military museum. The collection was, quote, for research and for the interest of the general public. The boxes were soon augmented by the Army display at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, and later 2 copies of every small arms weapon produced at the arsenal were also preserved. The museum opened in 1905 is now the 2nd oldest U.S. Army museum in operation. Last year there were concerns that the museum would close, but now appears the museum will remain open. While the museum is best known for its small arms collection of more than 1,200 weapons, its bigger mission is to interpret the people, processes, and products of the arsenal, as well as local history, such as Fort Armstrong, the Black Hawk War, our bridges, and the Confederate prison camp. Looking a few years to the future, the plan is now to invest significant funds to update the museum exhibit space. This may lead to some weapons not being on display, but the museum will continue to tell the story of Rock Island Arsenal and our local area.
Yeah, so I've grown up around history my whole life. My father actually worked in Army museums, so I grew up in them. And it really instilled in me a sense that museums exist, and this museum exists, to tell a story, to really make America's history, our local history, part of your everyday life. One thing I really enjoy about my job here is when I have school kids come in. I love having school kids come in because what I'm able to do is I'm able to take their textbook, which is all full of dates and places and names, and make it relevant, to make it personal to them. And I think that's what I find my civic spark is making history relevant again, making it meaningful to people so that they can reflect and they can learn from it.
I got into the military kind of on a dare, you know what I'm saying, and with nothing really better to do when I was 18, and that's why I always counsel people is whatever reason you came in, there's a reason that's going to cause you to continue to serve. You know, my reason to come in, that light's not going to last, you know, very long. And so I did have an opportunity to attend United States Military Academy, and over the course of training and being able to do it, I fell in love with the idea of serving soldiers, and that passion that was ignited there at the Academy has lasted, like I said, 35 years. And so when you're in the service of soldiers, I think that becomes its own benefit, because you can see the growth and you can see your impact. But and sometimes you don't forget the idea that you're supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States, and that you're preparing to fight and win our nation's wars. But it's the brotherhood, sisterhood of being part of this organization of people that have volunteered, selfless service, like-minded individuals. It's just a passion.
We are honored to celebrate 250 years of our United States Army with you. We would also like to note that the Marines and the Navy will be celebrating their own 250th anniversaries later this year. We thank you for watching and hope you have enjoyed this WQPT Anthology.